A venomous reptile held a secret in its blood. That secret helped people lose weight and beat diabetes. A drug was born, Ozempic. But this isn't just a drug. It curbs alcohol, offers hope for Alzheimer's, protects the heart. And it all began with a deadly creature in the desert. Now it's become a multi-billion-dollar revolution. This isn't just about medicine. It's a shift in humanity's fate. How? Let me tell you. Ozempic was originally developed to treat type 2 diabetes, but over time, it was discovered that it not only lowered blood sugar, it also helped with weight loss, Alzheimer's, and heart disease. As a result, it gained worldwide recognition. However, the weight loss aspect of it also brought along some ethical concerns. If you paid attention to events like this year's Oscars, you might have noticed that many celebrities, already quite slim, have reportedly lost an unusual amount of weight thanks to these drugs. Heloderma suspectum is a venomous reptile species found in the United States and Mexico. What makes these creatures particularly interesting is that they eat large meals only twice a year. The rest of the time, they survive on whatever small prey, like mice or rabbits, they can catch. During those large meals, they can consume up to 50% of their own body weight in a single sitting. Imagine that. It's like a 100-kilogram person eating 50 kilograms of food in one sitting. In the 1990s, biologists studying the digestive and circulatory systems of these animals encountered a very strange discovery. The blood sugar of these extraordinary creatures remained stable both during months of starvation and after consuming massive amounts of food. Scientists curious about the reason eventually discovered that it was due to a hormone-like molecule found in the animal's venom called exendin-4. When they investigated whether a similar molecule might exist in humans, they discovered that cells in the human intestine secrete a molecule called glucagon-like peptide 1, or simply GLP-1, and that it closely resembles exendin-4. GLP-1 also regulated blood sugar in humans, just like the insulin molecule. Additionally, it created a feeling of fullness. But the difference between us and Gila monsters was that exendin-4 remained in their bloodstream for a long time once released. In contrast, GLP-1 in humans was quickly broken down and degraded in the bloodstream. Look, GLP-1 is a truly fascinating molecule. As early as the 1930s, studies showed that the human body could control glucose taken orally much better than glucose given directly into the bloodstream. But biologists couldn't figure out how the body was doing it. Their hypothesis was this: food that passed through the mouth into the stomach and then into the bloodstream triggered the release of certain molecules along the digestive tract, which in turn stimulated the pancreas to start releasing insulin in advance to control blood sugar. For this reason, just like physicists named the force that expands the universe dark energy because they knew its effect, but couldn't directly observe it, scientists gave these mysterious molecules the name incretin, derived from the French words for intestine and secretion. What incretins actually were could not be understood until the 1970s and 80s. Eventually, scientists succeeded in identifying two key incretin molecules. The first was GLP-1, which had a remarkable ability to trigger insulin release, especially when blood sugar levels rose. The other was GIP, known as glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide. Experts quickly discovered that these molecules were closely linked to diabetes. And since we're here, let's talk about it. Diabetes is truly a terrible disease. As you probably know, there are two types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. The main difference is that type 1 usually begins in childhood, while type 2 typically develops later in life. Type 1 diabetes is actually an autoimmune disease. This means their immune system mistakes the beta cells in their pancreas for enemies, attacks them, and causes them to die. Beta cells release the well-known hormone insulin when blood sugar levels rise. This allows the sugar in the blood to enter the cells, which in turn lowers our blood sugar. In people with type 1 diabetes, the beta cells are partially or completely destroyed. As a result, they can't produce insulin and their blood sugar rises abnormally. And since this disease usually begins in infancy, even very young children must have their blood sugar monitored constantly 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Otherwise, due to insulin deficiency, their cells can't get enough sugar. To survive, the cells start burning fat, but during fat burning, an acidic substance called ketone builds up in the blood. If this exceeds a certain threshold, a condition called diabetic ketoacidosis can occur, which can lead first to coma and then sadly to death. Type 2 diabetes is a condition that develops later in life in people who were born healthy under the influence of genetic and environmental factors. People with type 2 diabetes can still produce insulin, but over time, their cells become resistant to insulin's ability to move sugar into the cells. This is what we call insulin resistance. Since blood sugar doesn't drop, the pancreas assumes there isn't enough insulin and tries to produce even more. This overworks the beta cells and eventually leads to their death. As a result, this process leads to the same outcome. After eating, blood sugar rises, but because the body either doesn't respond properly to insulin or the beta cells are already dead, it cannot bring the sugar level down, and having high blood sugar causes many serious problems beyond just the risk of death. Sugar molecules turn into what we call advanced glycation end products, which damage the body through oxidative stress, inflammation, and endothelial dysfunction. As a result, diabetic retinopathy, which is damage to the retina, diabetic nephropathy, which is kidney damage, peripheral neuropathy, which is the deterioration of nerve cells in the hands, feet, and legs, and of course, cardiovascular diseases all begin to develop. In addition, excessively high blood sugar reduces the efficiency of the immune system and lowers the body's ability to fight infections. Since our body cannot cope with this high blood sugar, it leads to fatigue, excessive thirst, frequent urination, vision problems, skin issues, headaches, and similar symptoms. If this chain of problems cannot be controlled in the long term, it can lead to the amputation of limbs, heart, and kidney failure, and unfortunately, eventually death. Anyway, in the 1990s, Dr. John Ng, an endocrinologist working at the U.S. Veterans Affairs Hospital, had already played a key role in the discovery of the GLP-1 molecule, but he was also the first person to realize that a diabetes drug could be derived from Exendin-4, a GLP-1-like molecule found in Gila monster venom. Key problem was that the investors he pitched the idea to were not easily convinced that such a drug could come from a deadly venom. But Dr. Ng did not give up and eventually managed to convince some investors of the practicality of his idea. As a result, a small biotechnology company acquired the license for the molecule. By the 2000s, Exendin-4 had been turned into a drug known as exenatide. It received approval for the treatment of type 2 diabetes and was released to the market in 2005 under the name Byetta. Thus, it was proven that a diabetes drug could indeed be developed from the venom of a deadly reptile. Of course, this wasn't the first drug developed for diabetes treatment. Though we call it treatment, neither type of diabetes currently has a permanent cure. We can only manage these diseases. The standard treatment for type 1 diabetes is to regularly supply the insulin that the body cannot produce. That's why people with type 1 diabetes unfortunately have to inject insulin into their bodies up to 4 or 5 times a day, starting from early childhood. If they miss a dose, there are serious life-threatening risks for the reasons I just explained. Can you imagine how difficult that is? You have to get injected 4, 5, even 6 times a day. That's why there are now pumps that continuously monitor blood sugar, calculate insulin needs in real time, and deliver it regularly to the body. Providing these devices to people at low or no cost is critically important. The treatment of type 2 diabetes is a bit more complex because it can develop differently in each patient. But the main issue is this: most of the medications work through different mechanisms, slowing the movement of food from the stomach to the intestines, reducing sugar absorption in the intestines, or forcing beta cells to produce more insulin. They do lower blood sugar, but they also cause significant weight gain. So you might be controlling diabetes, but now patients are pushed into obesity, which is at least as serious and something we've discussed before. Even worse, this creates a vicious cycle. Obesity increases insulin resistance, so you take medication to fight insulin resistance, but that makes you even more obese. So in the mid-20th century, to solve this problem, a drug called metformin was developed not from reptile venom, but from the lilac plant. Metformin regulates blood sugar by slowing down the liver's glucose production, and it does not cause weight gain. Tea can also be produced very cheaply. It's generally safe and works quite well for many patients, but metformin alone is usually not enough to fully control diabetes. We need something better. By the 2000s, just as the idea of using incretins for diabetes treatment was emerging, a new class of pills known as DPP-4 inhibitors was introduced. Instead of supplying GLP-1 or GIP directly, these drugs worked by blocking the DPP-4 enzyme, which rapidly breaks them down in the blood. This allowed incretins to stay in the bloodstream longer, just like in Gila monsters. But the ability of DPP-4 to control glucose was still limited. It wasn't enough. Then in 2005, Byetta achieved remarkable success by delivering GLP-1 directly into the body. This drug was very effective at controlling blood sugar, and unlike previous diabetes medications, it only needed to be injected twice a day. On top of that, these GLP-1 injections often led to weight loss in overweight or obese diabetic patients. Imagine that. 2 birds with 1 stone. Shortly after, a new formulation called Bydureon was introduced, which required only 1 injection per week. This made things even easier for diabetes patients. Around that time, the Danish pharmaceutical company Novo Nordisk slightly modified the structure of human GLP-1 molecules in the lab and developed a new molecule called liraglutide. This allowed it to stay in the bloodstream much longer. Launched in 2010 under the name Victoza, this drug provided better blood sugar control and also led to greater weight loss. But for it to be effective, it still had to be injected every day. However, Novo Nordisk began to notice something interesting. Some obese diabetic patients were losing so much weight that they were actually moving out of the obesity range. This led scientists to wonder whether these drugs could also be used to slow down the worsening obesity pandemic. Indeed, in 2014, they developed a higher dose liraglutide-based drug called Saxenda, which went far beyond just supporting blood sugar control and achieved remarkable success in weight loss. Drugs that could be used to treat obesity had finally appeared on the horizon. Then came a series of intermediate steps. In 2014, Eli Lilly developed dulaglutide. Sanofi, on the other hand, developed lixisenatide. With each of these steps, the frequency of injections decreased, while the drug's effects on lowering blood sugar and promoting weight loss increased. The problem was that these drugs had many side effects. Patients, especially in the first months, experienced severe nausea and vomiting. It was possible to bring people at the edge of obesity down to an overweight level, but there was still no effective treatment for those who were severely obese. the company that developed liraglutide, Novo Nordisk, began searching for an even more effective drug than liraglutide, starting in the early 2010s. Eventually, they developed the famous drug called semaglutide by making precise amino acid changes to liraglutide and adding a molecular chain that allowed it to bind to albumin in the blood, helping it remain in the bloodstream much longer. Semaglutide, released under the name Ozempic, had such unique molecular properties that it remained stable in the bloodstream for up to 7 days. This allowed it to keep blood sugar stable for much longer, just like in Gila monsters. Even more interestingly, patients using this drug were able to lose up to 10% of their body weight because they felt full much faster and recognized hunger much later. Their calorie intake dropped significantly. This was an extraordinary success that had never been seen with any previous diabetes medication. Following this, in 2021, Novo Nordisk successfully got a higher dose version of Ozempic approved for obesity treatment under the name Wegovy. Even before the success of Ozempic and Wegovy began to take the world by storm, a question had already begun forming in the minds of scientists at the American company Eli Lilly. If semaglutide, which acts like GLP-1, making it a GLP-1 agonist or mimetic, is already this effective, what would happen if we added the other incretin, GIP, to it? And this combination led to the creation of a second drug called tirzepatide. Tirzepatide, which combined both molecules and was released under the name Mounjaro for diabetes patients, not only controlled blood sugar more effectively, but also led to weight loss rates of up to 20 to 25%. Eli Lilly followed in Novo Nordisk's footsteps and launched Zepbound, a drug specifically designed for obesity. Pay attention, the weight loss figures like 10%, 15%, 20%, or 25% are just averages. Some patients were losing as much as 30%, 40%, or even 50% of their body weight. This matched and even surpassed the results achieved by bariatric surgery, which until then had been the only truly effective method for fighting obesity and involved surgically reducing or altering the stomach. But now, these outcomes could be achieved without surgery, using only weekly injections. You can imagine the storm, or rather the hurricane, that this created. This is exactly how the hype you may occasionally hear about in the news began. There were additional developments that fueled this storm. Patients using the drug reported feeling much worse after consuming alcohol, which led them to significantly reduce their alcohol intake. Studies have indeed shown that these drugs may also play a role in fighting alcoholism. Additionally, some animal studies have indicated that these drugs could benefit neurological conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, which actually makes incredible sense because it has long been known that Alzheimer's disease is closely linked to blood sugar levels. In fact, in academic circles, Alzheimer's is even referred to as type 3 diabetes. These findings only added to the drug's growing popularity. Think about it this way. Novo Nordisk, once a relatively small pharmaceutical company, began generating 0.5% of Denmark's entire GDP on its own, thanks solely to Ozempic. And the company's market value surpassed $500 billion, exceeding Denmark's entire GDP. And remember, all the benefits I've listed are very real. The people benefiting from these medications are real patients, so we can't downplay the value of these drugs. Still, it's important to keep 4 key points in mind. First of all, these drugs do not permanently cure diabetes or obesity. In other words, they are not a definitive remedy for these conditions. On the contrary, once you stop taking them, your blood sugar may become unregulated again, and you start to feel as hungry as before. These drugs don't create permanent changes. They just work much faster, more easily, and more effectively than previous alternatives. And they offer people with obesity and diabetes a chance to live a more manageable life. Just because you're taking this drug doesn't mean you can ignore the real foundations of health. Healthy eating and regular exercise remain essential. The biggest problem with reducing health to body weight is the belief that if someone loses weight or was never overweight to begin with, they must automatically be healthy. That's a complete myth. No matter your weight, there are essential things you must do in terms of nutrition and exercise. Secondly, just like any medication, these drugs also have side effects. While some patients experience almost no side effects, many report issues like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, and acid reflux. These side effects usually subside a few weeks after starting the medication. However, for some people, the symptoms are so severe that they can't continue using the drug. Additionally, although extremely rare, some patients have developed pancreatitis, and when these drugs were given to mice in very high doses, they were found to cause tumors in the thyroid gland. However, such high doses are not used in humans. More importantly, studies have not found a significant increase in such tumors. Interestingly, in some patients, the medication works so effectively that they begin to struggle with eating, which prevents them from experiencing the psychological pleasure of food. This alone can cause some to stop using the drug after a while. In others, issues like hair loss or facial hollowing, where cheekbones become overly pronounced, can occur. However, both of these are common problems associated with rapid weight loss and are not unique to these medications. In short, none of the known side effects are unmanageable. Still, it's important to be aware of them. Thirdly, while we know that short and medium-term use of these drugs is safe within the mentioned limits, we still don't know whether long-term use might cause any additional side effects. Unlike vaccines, these drugs aren't taken just once or twice. They need to be taken regularly, daily or weekly. As a result, they can lead to long-term changes in the body. These effects are still being actively studied. Of course, this doesn't mean that a harmful effect will definitely be discovered. There's no need to be overly pessimistic. But as we often say in science, it's wise to remain cautiously optimistic. Fourth, unfortunately, people wasted no time in using these drugs beyond their intended purpose. People who are neither diabetic nor obese have started using these drugs just to lose weight more easily. Some even resort to a method called microdosing, where they either take the drug at the recommended frequency but at lower doses, or take the full dose but less frequently than advised. As a result, they benefit from the drug's appetite-suppressing effects, even though they don't actually need it. Of course, this falls under what's known as off-label use, meaning these uses haven't been thoroughly studied and could potentially be dangerous. More importantly, when people who don't need these drugs buy and use them, it makes it harder for diabetic and obese patients, those who truly need them, to access the medication. For instance, the production of Ozempic and Zepbound couldn't keep up with market demand from 2022 to 2025, meaning not every patient in need could get them. Nowadays, production capacities have been increased, and these drugs have finally started to become more accessible. Of course, there are still many fascinating and complex aspects to this topic. Even in a country like the United States, where obesity rates are extremely high, obesity levels have started to decline for the first time since the 1980s. It's believed that at least 80 to 90% of this decrease is due to the widespread use of these drugs. These drugs don't just control obesity and diabetes, they also reduce the secondary illnesses triggered by them, including heart, brain, kidney, liver, and lung conditions. In some cases, the reduction in these illnesses has already surpassed 20%. This means countries may soon experience a lighter burden on their healthcare systems. And that's not all. These drugs have already begun to shake up massive industries that are known to harm human health. Leading this shift are the fast food and sugary drink industries, because those who take these drugs, former regular consumers, are now consuming fast food and cola far less. For this very reason, companies like McDonald's and Pepsi have already started undergoing the biggest strategic shifts in their history. The rest of the market is also aware of this trend. As these drugs help reduce the burden of chronic diseases, the number of complex and costly surgeries like amputations or bypass operations is also expected to decline. That's all from me for now. See you next time. Don't forget to subscribe and give the video a like to support the channel. Thanks in advance.